Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14 here. We are continuing our schedule previews. Today we go to the SEC East with the Tennessee Volunteers, who had a very nice 7-6 season under Coach Josh Heupel. And Blake, this is the team we were seeing in a lot of top 25s in the preseason.
Yep, ranked pretty highly by several publications, and I think that I've said I'm pretty high on this team coming into the season. I really like what Josh Heupel's done. Look, he stepped into a really tough situation, as we know, but I think he's got a great nucleus to work with here, and as we go through the schedule, I think you're going to see the reason why. They are a team that a lot of people should be high on, just because I think the schedule sets up so nicely to where there's a lot of win opportunities there. And honestly, when you really go through their schedule, I think there's going to be two games that, you know, for sure they'll probably be the underdog in. That'll be Alabama and Georgia. But quite frankly, I think every other game you could look at least right now and say, I could see Tennessee winning that game. And I'm not saying they can't beat Alabama or Georgia. It's just I think when you're looking at it from the odds standpoint, those are the only two games I look on the schedule right now and say, okay, they're going to be the underdog. By how much, I don't know. The rest of them, I think they could go a lot of different ways here. And so, yeah, it's I think things set up nicely for the Vols as we go through the schedule.
Well, anytime you have a schedule that includes Alabama and Georgia, that's not two teams you want to play, but the schedule is otherwise pretty manageable, as you alluded to. The Vols really have scheduled, in my mind, 3 built-in wins. They've got 7 home games and really an 8th at Vanderbilt, where they'll be the home team. It won't be on their field, but they'll have more in the stands. And so that's the good news. No, the bad news, my goodness, that 5-game stretch in midseason, excepting one game, is brutal. And you talk about Tennessee potentially being favored in a lot of these games. Well, a lot of these are going to be more like toss-ups. And, if it doesn't start well for the Vols, you could see them underdogs in 4 of those 5. I don't know that's how it's going to play out, but the middle of the schedule, starting really with September 24th with Florida, is going to be very interesting.
Yeah, it will be, and I think that's where, at least with what we know right now, I think you're going to look at these, and like I said, I mean, I'm going to look at this when those games in particular. You got Florida at LSU. Talk about Bama. I mean, then UT Martin and Kentucky. I mean, I think they're a better team than Florida or LSU on paper, just in my opinion. Now, again, but those are still two games that could go either way, right? And when you just think about kind of where each team could be at that point, winning at LSU, even though new coach, I think LSU won't be a national title contender or anything like that this year, but still winning in Baton Rouge will be difficult. But I think it's just, again, going by what we can only go by, and that's just on paper. I think it's still something where you get Florida and Knoxville. They're another team just like LSU going through some changes. I don't think they'll figure everything out this season. And so you have those two teams back to back. I mean, if you can win both of those games, then I think that's when you're really setting that, because at that point, if you win both of those games, you're probably 5-0 because you're probably beating Ball State. You're probably going to beat Pitt, probably going to beat Akron. So I think that's a scenario where you're looking at that and saying, okay, Florida and LSU games to me are the two big ones, that you look at and really look at those as, I don't know if you call them swing games, but they're going to be very important kind of where things stand heading into, that stretch where obviously you play Alabama with a big opportunity on October 15th. So,
well, let's hit the first 3 quickly before the Vols get into the conference portion. Ball State is probably going to be one of the worst 10 teams in the FBS according to the rankings. I'm seeing Akron probably one of the worst 5. So that's 2 built-in wins at home. The Ball State game on Thursday night, the Vols seem to do a lot of Thursday night openers the last decade or so for whatever reason. And then in between that game at Pitt, I'm seeing Pitt in a lot of preseason top 25s. I know a key loss of a quarterback and a receiver transfer that happened this summer. But Pitt, according to the experts, will still be a very tough foe. Of course, the Panthers beat Tennessee in Knoxville last year in a 1-possession game. That one on the road at Pitt. That one's going to be a very interesting test for the Vols. And if Tennessee does get that one on September 10th, they've got to be feeling really good about their chances heading into that late September and October portion of that schedule.
Yeah, I mean the Pitt game's obviously the one, like you said, you circle, and it just I think it's the second game of the season, and there will be a lot we still don't necessarily know about either team just yet, just based off of one game before that. But I mean, it's an important game. That's why, like I said, I think if you talk about winning both those Florida and LSU games, I just think at that point that probably will have proven that Tennessee would have gotten a win against Pitt and kind of been in that scenario if you're beating both of those two, Florida and LSU. But it's still going to be a challenge, given like you said, they did beat them last year, and the quarterback change. You don't have someone that's a first round pick there anymore. So I think that'll be an interesting one. But I think that's kind of your big game early that really tells you, all right, Tennessee goes in and beats a Pitt team, like you said, maybe a top 25 type team. That I think will give you a much better. If you're Tennessee, you'll be a lot more confident about facing the rest of the schedule, knowing that again you are going to make that trip to Baton Rouge. You got to go to Athens. Again, I think they'll beat South Carolina and Vanderbilt on the road, but still, I mean, it's the SEC. I mean, every game we know is gonna be tough, but that is a very intriguing one. There, in the second game of the season to go up against the Pitt team that is still going to be a really good team. I think right now, just looking at it from my standpoint, I think Tennessee's probably better and may have a chance to get a pretty nice win there. So.
Okay, in my mind, the two most important games of the season for Tennessee are the next two. Florida on September the 24th, that one in Knoxville, and then a bye, and then LSU on the 28th. And this is why I think these are important games. Well, first of all, they're league games. The Florida game, of course, that's been one of Tennessee's biggest rivalries for, at least 25 years now. But order of schedule is something we talk about a lot. And let's turn the tables a minute and look at the Vols a year ago, Blake. Fourth game of the year last year, Tennessee plays Florida. Let me look up the score. It was kind of lopsided, but I watched the game and it wasn't as bad as the score indicated. It was 35-14. Or excuse me, 38-14. You play that game in week 11 or 12 when Florida's reeling, changing coaches, all those things. Tennessee is, I think, without any debate, the better team in November, but they played the game in September. Now, Florida could be the better team late November. I'm not saying that they are going to be, but I think if you're Tennessee, you would rather have that game early because Florida's undergoing a coaching change just like Tennessee did a year ago. Took a while to grow into the system and grow into the new ways, but the Vols were a different team in November than they were in September. Now those roles are reversed with Florida and Tennessee, and I think that placement on the schedule, and of course that's usually when that game is played, is in September, is going to be a little more advantageous for Tennessee. Same thing with LSU. The Vols get a bye, and then they go to Baton Rouge. Brian Kelly, new coach, new system at LSU. They've got some offensive line issues. I think for Tennessee, you might rather have those games in week 2 or 3, but I think for Tennessee, the order of those two opponents there could end up being very important. And those are two big swing games for Tennessee because if the Vols win both those, then you're looking at, Sugar Bowl, that type of thing potentially.
Yeah, that's like I said. I think it's you said it. I mean, it's the same situation. Florida and LSU, not the exact same, but there's a lot of similarities. And to me, those are the two biggest games on the schedule as things sit right now, because that is the difference in being a team that can maybe. No, I'm not saying going to eclipse Georgia for the East Crown or anything, but you win both those games, you're sitting pretty in that second spot probably. Knowing that you really build up to that game in November, maybe against Georgia. So yeah, those are the two ones you circle. I think on the schedule right now, I'd probably add that Pitt one in too, just because, like we said, that could be just depending on which way that goes. But that's a non-league game. But I think at least right now, the Florida LSU ones are the big ones on the league schedule. So.
Yeah, the next two, I don't know that there's much to talk about. Alabama, that is in Knoxville, but this is going to be Alabama's best team, some think, in several years. That one's going to be tough for the Vols to bite off, and Knoxville and Tuscaloosa are on the moon. Then you got Tennessee Martin, which was 156 in Sagarin last year. Sagarin rates both FCS and FBS teams in one rating. Tennessee Martin not expected to be a top 25 team in the FCS. That should be a rollover for the Vols as it has been in past years. Then it gets interesting again. That Kentucky game, you speak of swing games. This is a contrast in styles. This one is in Knoxville. Kentucky, probably more ball control, run oriented, although Will Levis is a really good quarterback and they've got some weapons. Always a stout team on defense. Tennessee is going to be the opposite. It's not going to have its bread buttered on the defensive side. It's going to play faster. That one has been a very interesting game in past years, and I think it will be again, Blake.
Yep, I think so too. It'll be a very significant game, like I just said, especially when you talk about the East and and like you mentioned, when it comes to bowls and those kind of things, that's a big game because you got both those teams coming in with very high expectations, and I mean, even the Alabama game, I think is like we said. Let's just say there's a scenario if Tennessee comes in 5-0. I mean, you come into that game 5-0, and
That's
you've
a
already beaten.
CBS game. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're beating Florida, you're beating LSU on the road. You get a nice win at Pitt. I mean, I'm not saying Tennessee's going to win the game, but that's a much different setup if Tennessee comes in 5-0 and Alabama's probably still unbeaten, of course, at that point. I think that one's a lot more interesting versus, let's say, Tennessee drops a game or two before they get there. So, yeah. So, I mean, it's Alabama. It's always going to be interesting, but the Kentucky one is definitely very intriguing too because Kentucky will be very good. And yeah, I mean, that's again that there's no way of knowing where either team's going to be at that point in the season, but at least on paper, it sets up as that should be a very entertaining game, I would think.
Well, at Georgia could be entertaining for a while. Again, that's one that you might like to have a little bit earlier than where it is on the schedule. Not that Georgia's changing coaches or systems, but Georgia lost, 15 players to the NFL draft. Of course, still tons of talent. Georgia predicted my most everybody that I've seen a preseason top 4 or 5 team. That one in Athens, which will be tough to bite off. Missouri, this is the game last year that I think really springboarded Tennessee's turnaround. The Vols jumped on Missouri really early in that game and never let up. I think that's the game that gave Tennessee confidence going down the stretch. Then at South Carolina, a team, speaking of confidence down the stretch, Carolina, I didn't think very talented a year ago, but that was a team with a coach that believed in itself and kept playing, wound up very unexpectedly in a bowl. And then Vanderbilt to finish the season in Nashville. Shouldn't be much of a game there. Tennessee will be heavily favored. And again, will probably have more of its fans in the stands in Vandy. Thoughts on those last 4 games there, Blake?
Yeah, I mean, of course, like you said, you'd love to have more games than home. Just in terms, I mean, you love any road game you have be a home game, but I think the Vanderbilt one, as you said, will be a pretty much a home game anyways. But I mean, Georgia, whether you play them in Knoxville or Athens, it's going to be a challenge. Just the same with Alabama. So I think there's a lot of similarities between those two games. But it will be a tall order, I think, by that point in the season to beat a Georgia team that, like you said, is going to have some new personnel, but by November they'll have it figured out. Missouri, I still think Tennessee is just a better team, at least from what we know now. Now, again, who knows at that point in the season, but I think that one sets up nicely. South Carolina one I find interesting because
Yeah.
they're one of those teams that I think you just expect now they're going to be better at the end of the season than they were at the beginning, right? And I think that's a situation where kind of that Shane Beamer is probably going to put them in a position to where they're at least better than they were, the month prior. And I think that's kind of what you've expected from him now, just in his first season. So I think that could be one that you kind of circle, and that's a big game for South Carolina. And but as we said, I mean, we're playing what ifs at this point. There's no way to know kind of exactly where the two teams will be, but I think that one's pretty interesting, just from what we think we will see from South Carolina. Another team, I think, that could be sort of a surprise in the SEC. So.
We talk about things that make schedules interesting, and we talked about Alabama's earlier. We said Alabama's we didn't think was that interesting, but Alabama's going to be clear favorites in a number of games. This one is kind of the opposite to me because you've got games at Pitt, Florida, at LSU, Kentucky, maybe at South Carolina, given that one is in Columbia. To me, you've got maybe 4 or 5 games there, Blake, that are potentially 6 points or less one way or the other. That to me makes for an interesting schedule.
Yeah, and I think that's where your opinion on Tennessee is gonna your mileage is gonna depend on that in terms of what you think their record could be, because it's one of those where, as I said, I mean, I'm probably as high on them as a lot of people are, and I think that they do have a chance to win a lot of games, even with a schedule that I think, again, I would base it. I don't want to say it's an easy schedule, but I think it's a very manageable schedule just because I expect Tennessee to be a really good team. So I think in that regard, knowing that, yeah, they're going to have to make some of these road trips and some of these road games could go either way. Really, honestly, I think when you look at, I think all but the Vanderbilt one, I think there's a lot of, Pitt, LSU, Georgia, South Carolina. I think they're all, I wouldn't expect Tennessee to lose all those games by any means, but they're all on the road and they are against decent enough teams that you have to show up and play well to win. So I think that's one thing you really circle, but I think there's a lot of opportunity with these home games too. And that's it's not the same conversation we've had with Tennessee because we know the circumstances have been different, but it feels like we have this similar conversation every year just because we talk about them getting back to where they want to be. I think this is a schedule that can really help them get there because there's a lot of opportunities to kind of prove themselves in some of these spots. And like I said, I think to beat some of these teams that, at least right now, I think they should beat, whether that's a Florida, maybe sneaking away with a win at LSU. Those are the kind of wins to me that really kind of show you, all right, we're able to go in and win these kind of games. I think that LSU one is the one that I find most intriguing right now, to be honest with you, the entire schedule,
Yeah.
because I think that's one, if they go in there and win that one, that's a big win, even though this isn't the LSU that maybe we've seen. I don't expect them to compete for a national title or anything, but I think just going in and winning a big road game like that in conference, I think that will be one that you kind of circle and say, all right, maybe that's a big launching point for Tennessee the rest of the way.
Well, you've seen Tennessee under different coaches have these seasons where it spurns the Vols are back talk. You saw it under Butch Jones. You saw it under Derek Dooley. Uh, you even saw it under Jeremy Pruitt briefly. But here's what I think could be the difference. Let's say Tennessee has one of those 8, 9, 10 win seasons this year. The difference, maybe, although Tennessee's always had pretty good recruiting classes, this one shaping up to be really, really good so far. So maybe a little extra importance on winning some of those games, given the way you're seeing the Vols recruit right now.
Yeah, it's for sure. And look, you've got enough. I said I think you've got enough interesting matchups on the schedule to really be very appealing and be able to come away with some of those just big wins that can do a lot for you in recruiting. So it's going to be interesting, I think, to see how it plays out. But I think I don't even think cautiously optimistic is maybe the right way to put it anymore. I just think I think there's reason to be optimistic for Tennessee now, and I think this is one where I do. I like the way the schedule sets up. When you think about it, I mean, what, 6 of their first 8 are at home. And then you got a back half where if you're winning those games early, that's a manageable final 3 of the last 4, even though the Georgia one will be difficult. So yeah, I count me in as one who I'm not going to say it feels like 98, but I think there's at least things headed in the right direction. So.
All right, he's Blake Lovell. I'm Chris Lee. We have done now 4 SEC teams. If we've not gotten to your team yet, relax. We'll be getting to that in the coming weeks. I'll probably be having an SEC West baseball draft preview, maybe coming later today or tomorrow. We've done one for the East. So if you're ready to dive into the Major League Baseball draft and how that affects SEC teams, both with current players and signees, I think you'll like that. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you again very soon.